Yay. So here we are. Good morning, everybody. And this is Dr. Betty with one of my favorite people in the whole world, Dr. Mark Goulston, dear friend. How are you, Mark?
I am wonderful, and I'm especially wonderful because I'm with my dear friend Betty.
Having such a wonderful time. You mentioned that you've got some books, and you have so many books that you have written, and you've made such an incredible impact in so many different people around the world. Talk about that. What is that behind you? That's a different language.
That's Russian. So I was in Moscow a year ago, and I headlined with a fellow named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he was a Nobel Prize winner. But for some reason or other, my books, they do pretty well in America, but I have 5 bestsellers in Russia. And here's the irony.
Amazing.
And I'm not here to say anything political. Here's the irony. So one of my books is called Just Listen. It became the top book on listening in the world, 26 languages. And the rest of the world wants to learn how to listen better. America needs to learn how to listen to each other, but they don't want to. They want to be listened to. So it's really ironic. So the rest of the world says, no, we love your book. Can you come over? We want to be better listeners. I think part of that is also that the rest of the world still reads books. When I went to Moscow, it's amazing, all the bookstores. I mean, they're all over the sidewalks. I mean, it's amazing the reading that the people do. And I'm not here to make a political statement, but they're curious.
Yes.
And I think I have a feeling that people who read a lot, and I don't mean just People magazine, I mean, who read books, I have a feeling that they're better listeners.
Well, that's interesting because you wrote a book on listening, and that's the book that you went to talk about in Russia, right? So that was Just Listen. And so let me tell the audience a little bit about you, because I know you, and many of the people that will be watching this will have seen you already, but there will be some new people. So Mark, you were a psychiatrist, and so you are a psychiatrist, non-practicing psychiatrist. You taught at UCLA, and you also have a record of counseling people who are suicidal for over 30 years, and none of them have killed themselves. That's a record in America. And you won a lot of prizes and a lot of accolades because of your work. Something that you don't like to talk too much about, but I'll bring it up anyway, is you were the psychiatrist on the O.J. Simpson case, and you also teach folks in is it in the, you teach negotiations?
Yeah, I've trained FBI and police officers.
FBI and police officers negotiations. So, there's another negotiations. I don't know if you've even written a book on negotiations, but you live the book on negotiations. And when I was considering writing a book, I came to you to advise me on the book on negotiations because you're so amazing at it. But one of the things that has really shown up lately because of COVID and because of everything that's happened in America and all over the world is kids and parenting. And as I talk to people in the last 8 months or so, the idea of parenting and the idea of having well-adjusted kids and well-adjusted families seems to be coming up. And I can't think of anybody better than you to talk about the topic, and how wonderful that you have a couple of books that are coming up. And so I'd like to kind of explore that a little bit. Tell us about first, well-adjusted kids, because you came up with a formula and you got some things, quite a bit to say about the raising a well-adjusted kid and then having a well-adjusted family. Can you talk to us about that, and then we can talk about your books?
Well, part of what I came up with is something called the seven habits of well-adjusted children. It could also be the 7 habits of healthy families. And what I came up with was the idea that, and people can find this, and you can put a link to this. But what I came up with was this idea that that there are these 7 habits that if our kids have them and if we have them, they're going to be well adjusted. So like one habit would be being able to get frustrated or disappointed without getting overtly angry.
Yes.
Another habit would be not quitting on something because it's too hard. Another habit would be cooperating with other people, even if you have a different opinion. Another habit would be thanking someone or apologizing to someone or asking for help. So there are 7. So here's the idea, and this is what I put out. The idea is that you see these 7 habits and you write them down on 7 strips of paper. And once a day, one person in the family pulls out one of the habits. Let's say one of the habits is feeling frustrated and disappointed and not getting overtly angry.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel angry, but you don't start yelling.
Right.
And what happens is one member of the family pulls out one of the pieces of paper, and then everybody in the family does it that day. So parents, that's going to be the stumbling block, because parents have to model being frustrated or disappointed, not getting angry.
And not getting angry, yes.
Monkey see, monkey do, kids imitate our behavior, not what we tell them. And
Right.
so what happens is the whole family does whatever that is. Or another habit, not quitting on something because it's too hard. And then at the end of the day, everybody reports back what happened. And you do this for 7 days. And at the end of 7 days, you each share what was the best habit, what was the best day. Then you shuffle the paper and you do it again for another 7 days, and you keep doing it until you start internalizing the habits.
Oh, wow.
And the reason I created this is I can tell you as a parent and as a grandparent, one of the regrets, if you care about your kids and your grandchildren that you have, is that you didn't raise them to be able to make it in life. You didn't raise them to have resilience. You didn't raise them to have commitment. You didn't raise them to have stick-to-itness. And at the end of your life, you look at them and you can be angry at them. But I think if you're a loving parent, you can turn on yourself and say, I didn't do a very good job. They looked to me and I didn't help them develop habits that would help them be successful in the world and actually have the world respect them. Because if you internalize these 7 habits, the world's going to respect you because very few people have these habits.
Absolutely.
And so it's actually a way to get away from those regrets, because I'm blessed. I have 3 grown children and they do great. They have each other's back and they've done well. But, there were certain habits, even amongst those 7 habits, that I wish I'd done a better job with. And again, I think why this works is because you as the parent, you got to do it too.
Yes, you do. Because whatever we do, and and not just as parents, I often say that parenting and leadership are so similar. And, just like we have to, well, we don't have to, we get to really model the behavior for our children. We get to do the same for our employees, because I always say, we sneeze, they feel a hurricane. We walk in, they have a magnifying glass on everything we do, however we dress, everything, who we look at first, who we talk to first, everything. And the same thing with our kids, except we spend time with our kids in their formative years, right? And so when they grow up, they, we always hear they've grown up just like us, right? Like the song goes. And so it's so critical.
Here's something. Here's a good way to segue, I believe. So, because as you said, you can use the 7 habits to help build your culture. By the way, in your company, I mean the
Yeah.
7 habits. You could do it in a small company. You could say, "Hey, we're going to pick one of these things, and we're all going to do it, and we're all going to get better together." It'll be the rising.
Exactly.
It's going to be the
Yes.
rising tide that lifts, all hopes and
Mm-hmm.
competencies. But here are some things you can do with your kids also during these rough times, because suicide rates, depression is really high. Something that I suggest to parents to do is every day check in with your kids and say, what was the best thing that happened today? And what was the most upsetting thing that happened today? And you hear them out. You don't give them an invitation and then just say, oh, it'll be okay. And you hear them out. And when they say what the best thing was, you can say, wow, that's amazing. What made it so great? And you don't have to dwell on it, and they'll tell you.
Right.
And then, what was the most upsetting thing? What made it so upsetting? And you say, oh, I understand. And then what you say to them is, what are you most excited about tomorrow? And what are you most worried about? So what you're really teaching your kids is perspective. What's perspective? Good things happen, bad things happen, but we make it through. That's all part of life.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're also teaching them is that the expressing of that can help them feel better. And as you mentioned, I was a suicide expert. So there's another tip if you're worried about your kids that I give. And this is an example, and we're going to talk about it, of something I call surgical empathy. So in my latest book, which was released December 1st this year, it's called Why Cope When You Can Heal, How Healthcare Heroes of COVID-19 Can Recover from PTSD. It'll help anyone who's been traumatized. It's perfectly applicable to veterans, but the publishers said, and I think they were prescient about this, I guess if the word, they said, a lot of these healthcare workers, they're seeing awful things. And when it passes, they're going to be just like veterans. And why is it that when veterans come back from a war and they're safe, why is it they're depressed? Why is it that they're killing themselves? Well, what we present in the book is this thing called surgical empathy. And surgical empathy means you go in and help people who've been traumatized safely think what they couldn't think and feel what they couldn't feel when they were busy surviving. So what happens with trauma is, so if you can imagine you're a healthcare worker, and
oh my gosh.
I mean, and you see it, and you see them,
Yes.
They're coming out of the emergency rooms,
Yes.
They're coming out of the ICU, they're crying from what they're seeing, they're overwhelmed.
Yes.
They don't have enough PPE, they're understaffed. On a bad month before, if you're in the emergency room, maybe you see 3-4 people die in a month. They're seeing that in a day sometimes.
Yeah.
Supervisors are dying. They go home. They can't stay home. They stay in the garage to protect. So it's like a perfect storm.
Yes.
And so what happened, and this is how, and we talk about this in Why Cope When You Can Heal, is that when something as traumatic as COVID-19 happens to you, we actually describe an algorithm. And what's good about an algorithm is when it makes sense out of something, it follows steps. And so in Why Cope When You Can Heal, we actually have something called a 12 phases emotional algorithm. It's actually 12 steps, but we didn't want to confuse it with 12-step programs and such and such.
Oh, yeah.
So, but the 12 phases, and I'll just share it. So imagine this. Let's empathize. Put yourself in the shoes of a healthcare worker, and you've just, worked a 48-hour shift. You wore the same mask because you didn't have any more. You saw 4 deaths. You went around to the back of your hospital because there was a van and storage unit housing the bodies because there wasn't enough room in the morgue. So imagine
Oh,
that.
wow.
So this is what goes on in the mind of a healthcare worker. They see the trauma, and then they feel horrified. After they feel horrified because it's horrific, they feel terrified, like, oh my God. They feel fragile, and we call that the horror, terror, fragile trifecta. But they're duty bound. They're not going to let their peers down. They're duty bound. So after they feel fragile, they feel an overriding sense of panic. But then what they do is they push away thoughts, which you can do consciously,
Mm-hmm.
but they have to push down feelings into their unconscious.
Yes.
You can push away a negative thought by focusing on another thought, but we don't really have control of feelings. So you push away the thoughts, push down the feelings. And what enables you to do that is you're having an adrenaline rush, because adrenaline goes up when you're in danger. It's not just excitement. And that adrenaline rush insulates you from those thoughts and feelings so you can function. And star athletes will play on adrenaline when they have a broken leg. They'll play a whole game and then they find
Yes.
out they've had a fracture.
Yep.
So adrenaline's really powerful. So there you go. You don't know how you're going to make it through the next shift, but you're up 48 hours and you feel on the surface kind of superhuman, but inside you know something's messed up. You just
Mm-hmm.
know it's going to come back.
Right.
And so you keep doing this day after day, week after week. And then what happens is when the danger goes away, the adrenaline insulation goes away.
And all of a sudden
and
you're faced with all of
it
this.
feels like everything's going to come up. So the analogy we sometimes use is, imagine that every time you're facing horror, terror, fragile, and you have to push something away, imagine taking a cat that you have that's suddenly screaming and you put it in the cellar. Then you put another cat in the cellar. Then you put 10. Then you put 100, because you have to function. The danger goes away, the adrenaline goes away, and you have to open the cellar.
That door. Oh my gosh.
And so the fear is that you can't experience it without it ripping you apart. So what surgical empathy does is it goes in there and helps you safely think and feel the feelings. And what helps you do that is you do it with a journal or with a therapist or with a peer group, and you each start sharing what happened to you when you had what was that horrific moment? What was the terrifying moment? So they're all sharing things.
Mm-hmm.
And as they share it, they're feeling it, they're expressing it safely. And as they do that, what happens is they begin to feel the relief, because there's the shared crying of what they've been through.
Yes.
And then there's something that we call of surgical empathy, and I'm going to show it to you. And it's something we call the 12. Let's see. I guess it's not
Yeah,
working.
it's hard to see it.
Oh, wait a minute. I guess it's because it's getting a little dark here.
Yeah.
And I'm using natural light. So you know what
That's
I'm going to do? Like, this is just this is too important. So I'm going to put on light here. See if this works.
Oh, yes.
There you go.
That works. Yes, that's perfect.
And what happened is my whole face just caught on fire. So wait, let me just cool myself down here. Hold on for a second, because I'm scaring myself. There we go. So what you're seeing here is something we call the 12 words. And if you look at the 12 words,
Mm-hmm. I see them.
I think,
Anxious, afraid, overwhelmed, so forth. Yes.
yeah, all those. So what we have people do, and this is in the book, and well, we're doing the best we can here. So it is what, oh, there it is.
No,
There you
it's
go.
there. I can see them. You want me to read them out?
Yeah. So here's how surgical empathy works. So as you're writing in a journal and you go back to some of these horrendous or terrifying incidents, or imagine doing this in a peer group, you share the incident and then you pick one of the words. which of these words did you feel most intensely? And I can read them off: anxious, afraid, overwhelmed, fragile, depressed, frustrated, angry, ashamed, alone, lonely, exhausted, numb. And what's weird, there's something called affect labeling, which means when you give someone a word for how they're feeling and they express it and feel it, they calm down. It seems counterintuitive, but when you say to a healthcare worker and they're talking about a horrific situation, so what did you feel underneath it all? I felt overwhelmed. And you can feel the almost expressing it.
Yes.
Well, say more about that. So the 12 words is an example of surgical empathy. Now, something I said about 20 minutes ago, but I'm going to bring it back, is here's an example of how to use surgical empathy with your kids, or if you're worried about them. And there's many different techniques in surgical empathy. So something you can ask your kids, and we mentioned it before, you can talk about what's the best thing and what's the most
Right.
upsetting thing. But another thing you can say to your kids is, here are the 3 questions. At the absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling? They're going to go, what? When it's at its worst for you, when the pain is really awful, how much pain are you capable of feeling? And by the way, if you're talking to kids, it's best to do this when you're doing an activity, because kids do not take well to heart talks if you're initiating them. They hate face-to-face talks. Teenagers can't stand them. Spouses.
Can I slow you down for a moment, because
Yeah.
I wanna be able to, because you're giving so many different nuggets, and I want to be able to make a connection for the audience on what you're trying to, what you're saying, and why they should do it exactly the way you're saying it. When you said the 12 words, right? We have anxious, afraid, overwhelmed, fragile, depressed, angry, alone, lonely, exhausted, and numb. So when we name something, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I name something and I say, I feel angry, all of a sudden I'm taking that anger and taking it from inside, and I'm naming it, so I'm putting it in an objective place, and I'm putting it outside of me. So it's like I'm feeling this. It's not that I am an angry person or a
Right.
depressed or a fragile. And that's the difference between the two, is, and that's the critically important part of what you're saying, is you have to name it so that it's outside of you, right? Is that correct?
Yeah. Something we've talked about, and I'm a neuroscience nut, and there are several chemicals that function, and some of you know anything about neuroscience will know what these are. So when we're under stress, our cortisol is high. Cortisol is a high stress hormone that readies us and says, hey, danger coming, and it readies the body. And then what happens is when we're under stress, it triggers adrenaline, because, we're scared. And what counters high cortisol is oxytocin. And oxytocin is the bonding hormone. That's why when a teenager or a spouse is venting, they don't want a solution. They want to be able to feel felt by you so they can feel the feeling. And when they feel felt by you without you pushing it back down their throat, oxytocin goes up. So when you are able to express, you're right, I'm not an angry person. I feel angry. I feel depressed. And when you write it in a journal, your journal is supplying oxytocin. When you write it down, oxytocin goes up. When you share it with another person and you feel that they're accepting it as opposed to shoving it down your throat,
Yes.
oxytocin goes up. And so the more that oxytocin goes up, the more cortisol goes down. And then when cortisol goes down, we calm down and we're able to think more clearly. And so that's
One
how
more,
yeah,
thank
go ahead.
you. Thank you. So totally get that. Now, between the three things, you said surgical empathy happens when you journal, when you have a therapist one-on-one, or when you do it in a group, when you share in a group. It's been known, or it's been said, that of all three, the most effective one is the group, because you have other people. It's like you're being understood, everybody's talking, and it's almost like you've got a group of peers that are conversing about it. Is that still the case? This was a long time ago.
Well, if you think of 12-step groups, Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the rules in those groups is there's no crosstalk, meaning people are sharing and no one's giving advice. Oh, you can do this. And that's one of the rules, because as soon as people start giving unsolicited advice, it shuts you down and it
Yeah.
stops you from feeling.
Well, it puts somebody else above you, and it puts you below if somebody's giving you advice. So all of a sudden we're not in the same place, and so we're not feeling each other. We're not communing. We're not sitting in the same space together, not feeling lonely anymore, right?
Right, right. In fact, one of the reasons Just Listen, my listening book, did, I think, pretty well, is what we talked about is the power of causing someone to feel felt, which is much different than they're feeling understood. Because see, when they're feeling understood, there is a intellectual distance between you and them, and you're the powerful person.
Mm-hmm.
And but they're still stuck with the feeling. When you say, I understand how you feel. Here's the difference between what we call surgical empathy and clinical professional empathy. So imagine you're a teenager or a spouse and you're feeling depressed. Clinical empathy would be saying, and just try this on, it's subtle. But if I were to say to you, are you depressed? Have you been depressed? Checking boxes, you'll go, yes. And instead of that, imagine my saying, you're feeling depressed, aren't you? See the difference?
Totally different. Because when you're telling me you're feeling depressed, it's almost like you're entering in my space with me.
Totally.
It's totally different. The other one, feeling depressed, it's like, okay, you're there, I'm here, you're better than me, and there's no feeling involved. But when you say, it's interesting how the play, and it's not just a play on words, it's also the tone that you used.
Yeah, because when you say, now again, you can use a distancing tone, you're feeling depressed, aren't you? That's not inviting. But if you use the inviting tone in which you're validating it,
Yes.
whereas if you say, are you feeling depressed? They can feel anxious. Well, if I say it, are you going to medicate me?
Right.
If I say it, are you going to think that I have a mental illness?
Right. Am I in trouble? Yeah.
Yeah. And the point is, when they're coming to you, they're not coming to you because they're happy.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
And so here are the three. Let me get this chunk out. So here's three examples of how you can open up your kid who doesn't want to talk to you. And so the first one, to repeat it, is you say to your kid, at your absolute worst, how awful are you capable of feeling? Not awful as a bad person, but how much pain are you capable of feeling? There's a good chance they'll say, go, huh? You say, no, at its worst, how much pain are you capable of feeling? And they might say, a lot. How much? Lots. Then the next thing you ask them is, and when you're feeling it, how alone do you feel? Pretty alone. Pretty alone. Pretty alone or all alone? All alone. And then the third thing you say to them is, take me to the last time you felt it.
Oh, wow.
And they're going to go, huh? Yeah, was it 2:30 in the morning when you couldn't get back to sleep and you had to study for school and you didn't know how you were going to make it the next 5 hours? Huh? Yeah, take me to the last time when you felt that awful and all alone. And here's the interesting thing, that when you can get them to take you there, and they describe it so you can see it with your eyes. They re-feel it, but they're not alone.
They're not alone. And it's in a safe space because it's not when they're all by themselves without any, in the raw, if you will. But when they're telling it to you, it's almost like they're getting it out of inside so that it's outside, and they're doing it with someone they love and trust.
That's right. And again, feel the difference. You're the kid, and I ask you, take me
Totally.
there. And here's the difference where you might say, well, I had a rough night and I couldn't sleep, and it was really hard getting back to sleep. And then instead of diving into it, you just say, well, hopefully you'll get some rest tonight or something. You can say something caring and responsible.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say to them instead, take me to the moment when you couldn't get back to sleep. So imagine if you then started saying to me, it was 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
I couldn't get back to sleep. I started punching the pillow. I felt like punching the wall. I started walking around the house looking for one of your old sleeping pills. And I didn't know how I was going to make it. And I felt like screaming, but I didn't want to wake anybody. And then the sun rose and somehow I made it through. But can you see, if they share that and you're with them, they feel felt. I can see it in your face right now.
Yeah.
Baby.
Yeah, totally.
And so that's surgical empathy.
Wow.
And what's happening.
Wow.
Yeah.
So everybody has the ability to do this. And it's really simple. So what I heard you say was, at your absolute worst, how much pain are you capable of feeling? And if they say a lot, then you say, well, how much? So you begin to go in this journey with them. So you don't just stay at the surface. You continue to and you're not pushing, you're just seeking to understand and to be right there with them. So how much pain? And let them do that. Let them repeat whatever it is that they're going to say. And when you're feeling it, how alone are you? How alone do you feel? And so you're taking out the first is how much pain. So now I'm taking the pain out. And then how alone, how lonely am I feeling? Because the feeling of being lonely and being completely naked and lonely and all of that and raw. So how lonely are you feeling? And then take me to the last time you felt that alone. So it's almost like, oh my gosh, I'm going to share my guts with you. Like I'm going to open myself wide open to you and allow you in my sacred space of this pain, loneliness, and you're going to sit right there with me. You're willing to do that because you're saying, take me there. And it's almost like, here's my hand. Can you hold my hand and walk me to this place so I can sit there with you? That's amazing, Mark.
Well, and so why cope when you can heal is a way of going in there and helping people express it in the ways that we're talking about. And, we wrote the book because, as you know, I'm passionate about veterans.
Yes, you are. Very much so.
And we don't want healthcare workers to become the 22 who kill themselves a day. And they could be.
Yes.
So, and this is, how they talk about long haulers, people who get COVID and they keep symptoms forever. I hope I'm wrong, but I have a feeling that we're in for healthcare workers being long haulers when it comes to PTSD.
Yes, I agree. I have a lot of family members in the healthcare industry and some outside of the United States. And it's been very rough. It's been very difficult. In the times when I have been able to have conversations with them about, tell me how you're feeling right now. Let's talk about this. They all of a sudden, it's so different to have a conversation like that. Tell us more about the book and where people can actually find the book, and then where can they find you? Because you've been so gracious, Mark, in being with us today. I want to make sure that if people have a relative, and this is not just for the healthcare workers, this works with anybody, a child, a co-worker, just pretty much anybody. So where can they find the book?
So we have a website called whycopewhenyoucanheal.com.
Okay.
And they did a wonderful job. I take no credit for it, which means it's a good website. If I took credit for it, it'd be a mess. And so they can go there and find out all about the book. And the endorsements were just amazing from heads of, healthcare centers. And if people buy bulk orders for their healthcare centers, and you can go there, purchase bulk orders, and if you order 100 books, you receive a special video that I've created, a 45-minute video that's only available if a center has bought 100 books, and if they bought, I think, 300 books, my co-author, and I haven't mentioned her name's Diana Hendel, and she was the CEO of Long Beach Memorial Hospital. And on her 100th day as CEO, an employee of the month came in and killed his 2 supervisors and himself. And she led the hospital through that, back to safety. But she herself pushed away the feelings. She pushed them down to function. She was very duty bound. And then actually that event happened in 2009 and 2015 because she's so responsible. She's Angela Merkel. I mean, I'm blessed to have her as a partner. And in 2015, the hospital was back in good shape. And she said they deserved a healthy CEO. And I realized I wasn't.
Oh, wow.
And so she went out and she realized she had PTSD. And so now she consults to organizations because what we also talk about is organizational trauma. It's not just individuals that get traumatized. Organizations do, the organizational structure. And one of the things we talk about is after trauma, there's a lot of guilt, shame, and anger. Why did this happen? Who's to blame?
Yes.
And it circulates and it's not expressed. And it can just create this awful traumatized culture. And we talk about that in the book too.
Well, I can't wait to get my hands on the book. I've heard you talk about the book, and I've heard you whisper little pieces and kind of leak little pieces of the book. And anything that you put your mind to, anything that you, Dr. Mark Goulston, put your hands on, to me, it's worth its weight in gold, or I guess platinum is more, it's better than gold, or emeralds or diamonds or whatever, because Mark, ever since I've known you, you have given so much. And when you speak, I take a notebook and I start to take notes. And today is no different. I've got notes, pages of notes, and they're underlined and they're colored and they're all over the place because these are things that I carry with me and I commit to memory. You're like a university walking, and except you're like a university with a heart and wisdom that is coupled with it. I just can't thank you enough for being with us today, making a difference together, which we love to do. And I hope that everyone who is watching this takes a moment to go and look you up on LinkedIn. You've got a new show that's going to be coming up, and you've got a lot going on that is giving freely to the society at a time when the society needs it the most. So, so everybody that's watching here, go to the website Why Cope When You Can Heal to find the book, and the book's name is the same, Why Cope When You Can Heal, by Dr. Mark Goulston and Diana Handel, who's the co-author. And we're looking forward to your show. We can't wait to hear about your show.
Well, we'll return the favor, and you're going to be on that one.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I would love to. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much for being with us. And to everybody, please like this show and share it widely. We want a lot of people that are in much need of this to take it and to internalize it and to utilize it with your friends and family. Be safe, everyone. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.